Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here today. It might be morning for you, it might be afternoon for you, but we're so excited to have you. My name is Jennifer Pringle, and I am so proud to lead marketing research for the Outdoor Industry Association. For those of you who are not familiar with OIA, we are your trade association, and as such, we work with you on your behalf and in service of the outdoor industry as a whole. I'm going to share a slide with you. If you joined or attended the industry breakfast on Tuesday, you heard from OIA's executive director, Lisa Angenbrug. She's new and she joined OIA in March. But she shared this slide and explained that these aspirations of thriving business, thriving people, and a thriving planet, they're not siloed, they're interconnected, and they overlap to create a symbiotic ecosystem and a system that supports a very healthy and thriving outdoor industry. And this is our focus. This is our value proposition. This is what we do on behalf of the outdoor industry. And our role as a trade association is to elevate the collective voice, influence, and power of the outdoor industry by advancing these three areas. Because a strong outdoor recreation economy is one in which all people experience and benefit from and want to vote for and protect the outdoors. So today we are here, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Today we're here to talk about election 2020. I'm gonna take just a pause and a beat and a moment to celebrate yesterday's historic House vote for the Great American Outdoors Act. I wish we were all in person so we could hear the yelps and the woot woots together, but it was historic and a landmark vote. And now this piece of legislation will be on for signature to the president to vote to make into law. But what this does, it fully funds the Land, Water, and Conservation Fund that pays for so many of our amazing great spaces and great places to play. And it also puts $12 million into maintenance backlog for the national park. So this is huge. Many of us here in this session today have been fighting for a Land and Water Conservation Fund for many decades. So woot woot, exciting, such exciting news. So we're here today to talk about election 2020, what the polls say and what they can't tell us. So many of the policies of our elected leaders impact our ability to achieve a thriving planet and thriving people and a thriving outdoor industry, whether it's climate, conservation, trade. Our successes as an industry really depends on who's in office. And those policy decisions by those people are critically important, and really important is a strong voter turnout. So today we will be joined by Doug Usher. He'll lead our conversation. And in politics and polling, understanding the takeaways could mean the difference between winning and losing. So it's critical that we all listen and pay great attention. But as we saw in 2016, the polls don't tell us everything. And yeah, the 2016 election, a big sigh. We've got a lot of updated information looking into 2020 and how things are going. But the polls don't always tell us, how things will end up. We gotta keep working and really importantly, get out and vote and get our outdoor consumers and outdoor enthusiasts and outdoorists to get out and vote. Doug is a partner of polling and insight at Forbes Tate Partners. He's spent the last 2 decades building insights that have helped change the strategic directory of many companies, industry association, and political campaigns. So he's got a lot of great experience in this area. Before Doug does take the stage, though, we're going to hear a message from Jared Polis, Colorado's governor. So we'll have that video play, and then we'll bring Doug up for the presentation.
join you on the floor for. That means instead of meeting with many new and exciting brands and businesses on the show floor, we've used technology to explore new offerings, and instead of hosting large group events in downtown Denver's wonderful restaurants, we've placed our orders to go. It's no surprise that the thoughtful outdoor rec industry has stepped up with a virtual solution to connect outdoor brands with retail buyers and importers and distributors and designers, while also convening to address some of the toughest challenges and opportunities that face the outdoor recreation industry, both related to COVID and not. COVID-19 has certainly challenged us all. Since March, communities with a strong outdoor recreation economy have been particularly hard hit, with a disproportionate number of job loss, wage cuts, lost tax revenues. But the impact of COVID-19 is hard to overstate. But it also reveals our character and helps us focus on what matters. Now more than ever, we need the healing power of the great outdoors, and the outdoor industry will be critically important to the recovery of our economy and our own well-being. That's why, as governor, I've taken steps to ensure that our outdoor recreation economy stabilizes, and that as a nation we invest in opportunities to preserve our public lands and waters and support recreational entrepreneurship and fun. These are an important part of us staying healthy, economically, physically, and spiritually. By working with the Outdoor Recreation Office and many industry stakeholders, we set criteria for outdoor manufacturing retailers and outdoor services to get back to work during what we call our safer at home and in the vast great outdoors phase. That's what we call it in Colorado. And I've asked our federal delegation to support the Conservation Corps program to help build trails and roads. And I've also urged our delegates to pass the Great American Outdoors Act and provide financial relief to states and municipalities and areas to build new outdoor opportunities. They create better access in the great, vast outdoors. Together, we'll continue to responsibly steward Colorado's vast outdoors, share its many blessings with enthusiasts and beginners alike. Thank you for your thoughtful work and for finding a way to stay connected in a safe way. Colorado's outdoors is a vital part of our character and the nation's character, and together we'll ensure that generations will experience its full splendor and its many lessons. Welcome to Colorado.
Hi all, I'm Doug Usher, and I'll be presenting on the polls and what's going on. I think, as Jennifer pointed out rightly, there are things that the polls can tell us, and there are things that they really can't. And so I'm hoping to spend a little bit of time today to walk you through some of the poll numbers, which a lot of you already know. You follow the news and probably follow some of the sites that cover these things as well, but also things that you really need to understand to know what's going to happen, to see a little bit beyond what you see today, to know a bit more about the election. And I want to start with one big caveat, which is I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen in this election. And anybody who says they can is not telling the truth. One of the things that I found doing polling for so many years is that mostly people want to be reassured that the thing they want to happen is going to happen. That's why they look at polls. And what I hope I can arm you with here is a little bit of information that tells you what the polls are saying, but more about how to interpret events as they happen, and also recognize that, unfortunately, for it depends on what side you're on, but unfortunately, you can't know what's going to happen. That elections they are very real and dynamic events, and polls can give you an indication, but we're going to have to wait until Election Day to really know what's going to happen. And I think, unfortunately, this year we may have to wait weeks after the election to for sure know what happened. So let me share my presentation here. As was mentioned, I work for a place called Forbes Tate Partners, where we do work on a broad range of issues on the government affairs and public affairs side. But my training and my life my career has been devoted primarily to looking at polls, to understanding polls, and to get a better sense of what's going on out there. So I think, and by the way, please feel free to put questions in the question box if you have them. I don't know that I'll be able to necessarily move between all this data and the different boxes here, but at the very least, we'll be sure to answer some of these questions at the end, if not as I'm going. So I think if you take a look at the polls today, a few things are pretty obvious. I think the first is that the numbers have moved in Democrats' direction over the last 2 months. I mean, that's pretty clear, and I think pollsters on both sides would agree with that. And there are surges for Biden in places that are a little bit unexpected. We'll talk a bit about this, but certainly we're seeing in Texas recently, in Arizona, there are places that Democrats have lost for a number of years that are today starting to move up in the competitive place, in fact, being more competitive than some states that have been central to Democrats' majority in the past. And what's critical, I'll talk about this a little bit later, is this will have an impact beyond the top of the ticket. And we'll talk a bit about Senate races, but the relationship between presidential voting and Senate voting has never been stronger. And so as we see polls move, you're going to see a lot of things move across the federal chambers. Now, with that said, there are a couple of things that I think are really important for us to bear in mind. One is that the same forces that propelled Trump in 2016 are also there today, and they may be growing under the radar. And I think second is that the political cycle is changing faster than ever. So in the past, it seemed like the elections were closer than they are, meaning things that happened in July really mattered in November. Today, more than ever, these things matter less and less as people's memories change. So continue on here. Let's talk about job approval. This is something that, that people think about pretty heavily when connecting what's going on for the vote. The red line at the bottom here is Trump, and this compares his job approval over his presidential cycle over the first terms of the last 3 re-elected presidents. That is Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. There's 2 things I think that are of importance in this. The first is that President Trump has lower approval ratings than anyone who's been re-elected, right? Which is to say, you see him hovering around 40, a little bit below some, a little bit above some, but that's pretty well below where the last 3 re-elected presidents have been. And if you compare to presidents that have not been re-elected, most recently George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter, he's around the same level as them. Now, let me add one quick caveat to that, which is to say that Trump's approval rating has really only moved in a very narrow band. If you look at these other presidents, they've gone way up and come down. They've moved in a 15 to 20, even 40-point band. Donald Trump's approval rating have essentially not moved from within 44 or 45 on the high side and 37 on the low side, which is to say, in a lot of ways, his approval is baked in. Obviously, he doesn't want to continue to go down, but I think that you don't expect him to have as high an approval rating as others who've won in the past, again, based on his history. A second factor working against Trump at this stage is that he will have had a recession in the last 2 years before the election. You have to go back to Calvin Coolidge to find a president who was reelected having had a recession in the 2 years before their reelection. And what makes it more problematic for Trump is that it's happening in the months before reelection, not just in the years before reelection. Again, economy isn't everything, just like job approval isn't everything. But I think what we want to do is use these data to try to get a better picture of everything that's going on. Now, here's a part that I think is also working in both ways. That is, Trump has had strong success in fundraising through the first quarter of this year. The official second quarter numbers are likely to show Biden having had a bit of a bump and raising more money than Trump. But this is a place where I think that if you are within the Trump campaign, you can feel good about the fact that Trump is a rare exception to incumbent presidents in that he's got both major pieces of fundraising working in tandem. One is big dollar donors who are very interested in seeing him reelected, combined with incredibly strong grassroots work. That is, people who are on the grassroots willing to give the kind of small dollar donations that fuel these campaigns and that supercharge them. Biden has picked up tremendously in the small dollar donations since he secured the nomination. The question is whether his new alliance with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren will help to bring their energy over to him. The guess, though, I think the way to look at this is that both sides will be more than adequately funded. Trump will have way more money than he had in 2016. The other advantage for Trump here is that why do people care about money? It's because it buys exposure. Trump has an incredible advantage in the world of exposure. Right now, you can make the argument that his exposure during COVID has harmed him. And the Biden strategy appears to be keeping quiet, as the old political adage goes, when your opponent is digging a hole, don't take away her shovel. And in this case, Trump has used his shovel, frankly, to bring his poll numbers down. With that said, though, when you think about where the media attention is and where people are spending most of their time looking and what people read about and what leads all of the headlines, it's Trump, 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 Trump. And if there's a return for Trump, and inevitably there always is a tightening of a race, the positive coverage and his ability to dominate that will be extremely challenging for Biden to match. And if you look back to 2016, there were studies shown that based on his coverage, the volume of coverage, Trump had the equivalent of multi-billion dollars in free advantaged media. And you can imagine that continues as well. So here's something that the poll numbers will not say, but you should think about going into the, moving forward in the election. Now, with that said, let's look explicitly, directly at the polls. And what we see is something pretty clear, which we've, I think if anybody looks at this naturally, you'll understand that Biden has about an 8 to 10 point lead, depending on how you look at it. I think the thing to note here, there's a couple things, again, that work in Biden's favor here, beyond just this lead today. The first is that he's basically held a lead for the entire year. There's only a handful of polls, and out of the dozens, if not 100, national polls, credible national polls that have been done, and maybe only a couple that showed Trump leading Biden for the year. And obviously that's gotten wider since the beginning of coronavirus in April, and going back to March, frankly. I think the second piece that's important for him is Biden is trending at or around 50%. And so, again, it's not just that he has a lead, but that we have a near majority of folks that are supporting him. And this, by the way, has been true going back to March and almost going back to the beginning of the year. So again, this is good news in Biden's column. But of course, as I think everyone knows from the 2016 election, you also have to look at the states. And so we took a close look at the state, and frankly, we see two stories, actually probably 3 or 4 stories being told, but I'll tell a couple of them right now. The first is on some critical swing states, and that includes what we call the blue wall of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. That was the wall of Democratic electoral votes that all went to Trump in 2016, as well as in places, Arizona, the Democrats haven't won, I think, since Bill Clinton did in his second term, and North Carolina, which only Obama won his first term from going back years. We see today, if you take a look at the data that's up there in that chart, Biden having a consistent lead across these states. So as you work your way around, you see that Biden is leading by, between 3 and 7 points. But more importantly, if you look compared to the 2016 results, it's a very similar 6 to 7 point improvement in where Biden is today versus where Trump was at the end of 2016. Now, quickly, as with most of these things, also tell the reverse story here, which is that in every single one of these states, Hillary Clinton was leading, if you look at the polls right at this point. Now, she started to lose the leads in North Carolina and Arizona. They went away towards the end of the summer, never came back. Florida also tightened, and then eventually she lost, of course. And then I think one other thing that's worth noting is that she ended up losing states that she was never trailing in. So in Michigan and Wisconsin, those 2 states, there was maybe one poll at the end that showed her losing in either of those states. Now, I've got a question I'm going to take a quick look at, which is to say, is it possible that the votes remain 50 to 55% with Biden and Trump around 40 to 45%, that electoral colleges will decide the election in favor of the GOP candidate? That is a great question, and I'm going to turn to that right now. Now, one final point that I'd like to make, though, about what we've got in front of us is that, again, Biden is leading. Hillary was leading at this point, Clinton was leading at this point, but Biden is leading with higher absolute numbers, meaning he's in mid 40s to high 40s. Clinton was always in the low 40s to mid 40s. So we have to see if this is durable. The question I got from the group was the extent to which could Biden get 50 to 55% and Trump 40 to 45% and have Trump still win? I will say this, and this is what I try to demonstrate here in this chart, which is to say that Democrats have a significant vote distribution problem. What does that mean? That means that right now, if you look at the national race, if all the votes sort, quote unquote, if they were sorted as they were in 2016, Democrats need to win by 2 to 3% to get to 270. Now, what the heck does that mean? That seems really unfair. This is actually just a math thing, in a lot of ways a coincidental thing. If you look at the right-hand side of this chart, what you see are some of the biggest states. Those are the ones marked 20, 29, and 55 in terms of electoral votes: Illinois, New York, and California. But what you also see with those tall bars is how much Democrats win those big states by. And the point, again, you can't control how people vote. You can't move them around the country. But in a lot of ways, the Democratic president on the presidential level are wasting votes in those states. Meaning you win California by another 5 percentage points, right? That's 5% of 30 million people. That's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of votes that you get that count towards the national total, but don't get you a single other electoral vote. Same is true in New York and Illinois. If you take a look at the Republican side, and this is again why Democrats have this problem with watching the national numbers, not necessarily following the state numbers. Republicans are winning these very big states, Pennsylvania with 20, Florida with 29, by razor thin margins. What that means is they are being incredibly efficient with their votes. I'm not suggesting that there's a way to sort the electorate in a way to be so strategically smart that you can always end up right here. And there are times when it was advantaged in the other way historically. But I think the lesson here is twofold. First, to the question that came from Roberto, the reality is that Democrats, if Biden wins by 5 percentage points, there's almost no way that you can turn around and then thread the needle to win the Electoral College. The challenge spot is anywhere between 1 and 3 to 4 percentage points. That's where this comes into play. But from a strategic standpoint, thinking longer term for Democrats, and this is beyond, I think, this discussion, but just to think about is everything Democrats do from a policy standpoint, from a campaign standpoint, that wins another vote in Santa Monica and Brooklyn is not helping the Democratic Party take back the White House. And if you take a look at it, on the left-hand side of this, the deepest red states are small states. And in a lot of ways, by our constitutional system, et cetera, you want your base states to be the ones that win by the most and to be the smallest, and you want to really work hard to win the others. Again, there's no perfect world, but I just wanted to point that out because it's something that, of course, is on everybody's mind today. So let's go on to the Senate. Obviously, something that's on everybody's mind is what's going to happen in the U.S. Senate. And this chart just shows you, there is currently an advantage of 3 for Republicans. Of course, you need 51 votes, the majority. Now, just to be clear, even though it's 3, Democrats start with a serious disadvantage in Alabama. Doug Jones is a wonderful candidate, but it's going to be extremely difficult for him. So, you know, all things being equal, and if you sort of take odds where they are, they really need to be safe to gain 4. And by contrast, in a lot of ways, Republicans start with an advantage, so they really only need to hold, they have a bit more buffer to protect their majority. And of course, if it's 50-50, then whoever wins the presidency ends up setting the majority. I wanted you to take a quick look at how to compare 2018 and 2020. On 2018 is on the left-hand side. And as you know, only a third of the Senate is reelected each 2 years. That third in 2018 was many more Democrats than Republicans. 24 Democrats were up for re-election, just 9 Republican incumbents. That's a structural advantage for Republicans. They translated that in what was a very heavy Democratic year. If you look at the House results, you can see that in 2018, to what was actually a Republican advantage. You can make the argument that Democrats overperformed by only losing 2, given that, you know, they were down 15 seats in terms of what was competitive, but they lost. On the right-hand side, you can see what's going on in 2020, where you have the situation reversed. There are only 12 Democratic incumbents and 23 Republican incumbents, including 2 in Georgia. Now, how does this look in actuality? To further demonstrate the potential vulnerability for Republicans, this chart, or this graphic, shows you where the toss-ups are. And as you can see, you've got the 50 mark, right? That gets you to near majority. And almost all the toss-ups are there, which is to say Democrats are in a position where there are a number of toss-ups that get them to 50. Plus, if you then add, again looking at, sorry, let me go back. If you take a look at the likely Republican and lean Republican, et cetera, there are actually a few in there that are somewhat vulnerable that Democrats are looking at. On the Republican side, if you look at go to the left of this chart, the ones that are likely or lean Democrat, there are very few that I would say, and in fact, probably none, maybe Peters, but probably not, where Republicans have a chance of taking it over. So Democrats have a fair amount of momentum on the Senate side. Continuing on, we take a look at some of these key states. There are a few things to note. First is, from a polling perspective, Democrats are in relatively strong shape right now. And from a fundraising standpoint, they're also in pretty strong shape. Like Arizona is one where Democrats have been in very good shape. Mark Kelly is a strong candidate, and Republicans have been concerned about it. Back in Colorado, Governor Hickenlooper has been elected twice statewide with strong margins, and he's building that as well. What's going to be really interesting are Montana and North Carolina, states that are probably going to go back to Trump, where you have Governor Bullock, who's an interesting bet to take back the state. And in North Carolina, the current Senator Tillis is having some trouble in a lot of ways based to the current senator who is the current senator who is I'm sorry, I was looking at some of the questions here. A current senator who's been impacted by a scandal involving his fellow Republican from North Carolina involving stock shares. Now, with all of that, there's one important thing that has to be said, which is that, and just to explain what this chart says, is that in almost every case, and in fact, every case in 2016 at presidential levels now, states vote for the same party for president as for the Senate. And it's really remarkable that in 2016, every single place that had a Senate race voted for the same party for president and the same party for Senate. So even though we're seeing some places where there are Republican vulnerability, a couple of them, like Montana as one example, North Carolina as another, and Alabama, of course, with current incumbent Doug Jones, where if this trend holds, it becomes an even bigger barrier for the Democrat to unseat the Republican. And then you look at places like Maine with Susan Collins. Look, you don't expect that this is going to happen again, that no states will vote differently. But national politics and Trump's energy and the way in which he's driven the debate for or against him has a strong impact down the ballot. So as we look at Senate races and then continuing on to the House here, it's tough to pick and choose and say, this candidate is going to run in a state where Trump is going to win by 15, but this Democrat is going to beat the Republican in that same state. And I'm just going to take a minute on the House, which is to say that, I think the same things are true here in the House. And then this chart here shows you how many retirements they are. Like with the Senate, where there's a third that come up, and it's interesting to look at whether there are more Democrats or Republicans that are up for re-election. Here you see how many people retired. And looking backwards, in 2018, a time of massive change in Democrats' favor, you had 37 Republican retirements versus 18 Democratic retirements. If you go back to 1994, which was a wave year for Republicans, there were 25 Democratic retirements versus 9 Republican retirements. And whether they retire because they see a very vulnerable opportunity and they don't want to run for re-election, or it becomes vulnerable because they retired, that same trend is happening here in a way that harms Republicans. And so I'll just say around the House, the way to think about it is, if Trump not only needs to win, but needs to win by a pretty significant margin to have it carry all the way down through the House. Now, I'm just going to take a minute to turn this back to issues that you are care very much about, which is just to talk about the electoral environment for environmental issues, as well as where outdoor enthusiasts stand today. First of all, the environment is a salient issue, but with that said, there is it trails well behind jobs in the economy and healthcare, and also well behind what is characterized as other. And just to be clear, other includes such things as COVID, although that gets thrown into healthcare, and jobs in the economy. So the challenge right now, I would say, for environmental issues is really not, it's not that they're unimportant. They are important to people. And frankly, your membership is on the right side of these issues. It's just that in this election environment, it's going to be extremely difficult for issues like climate, et cetera, to make it to the top of the agenda for political leaders. With that said, however, you being voters and you participate and you getting your members and people that you work with and people that are customers, et cetera, to vote is going to be extremely important. And just a couple poll numbers, I think, to excite you, but also to warn you. Outdoor enthusiasts say they're ready to really to make a difference this year. And a majority of people who we characterize as outdoor enthusiasts are more likely to participate than they were in 2016. 40% the same, and just a couple are less likely to participate. Of course, the more they participate, the more they keep the issues on the agenda. However, when asked how likely they are to vote, 88% of the general population says they're very likely to vote in 2020. It's actually 10 points lower among outdoor enthusiasts, with 78% saying that they're very likely to vote. Now, whether it's because they are outside having a good time and not ready to go to the polls, or because they're more of a quiet community, just to be clear, the people that hold the views closest to your industry and that are most important for protecting your industry are today saying, even though they're more enthusiastic, they're saying they're less likely to vote than your typical voter. So mobilizing and motivating them is a key strategic objective, I think, for you coming out of this, to help A, keep politicians' feet to the fire, but B, make sure your preferred political candidates win. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and I'm more than happy to answer more questions. You can go ahead and put them on the Q&A. I know that Jennifer's going to join as well, but if you want to throw questions on the Q&A, I'm happy to follow them as well.
Thanks, Doug. That was great. And you did a great job of explaining some complex issues in a way that we can all understand. As you guys are possibly thinking of questions, I'm going to go ahead and talk about this year's Vote the Outdoors campaign. and hopefully some questions will come up so we can illuminate some more things for you. I'm going to share my screen and talk about the 2020 Vote the Outdoors campaign. And Doug did a great job of talking about mobilizing, or towards the end of his conversation, mobilizing voters. And that's really what we want to do, is that we want to provide tools and resources to help mobilize your outdoor customers, your communities, your networks, so we can get more people to vote on issues that they care about, vote in candidates that care about those issues. And really, 2020 will be a really big year of getting out the vote. And so in the midterm, we launched this program. We launched Vote the Outdoors first in 2018. And when I say we, I mean we as a collective, not just OIA. What made this program so successful is that this was a brand agnostic program that many brands, individuals, retailers adopted and amplified and got information and education out to your customers and your consumers and your audiences. So it was super successful, one of the biggest programs that we've had as an industry association. So we reached 14 million Americans. There were over 3,000 social posts. We endorsed 23 candidates, 20 of them got elected, and of the 6 ballot measures we were educating and endorsed, 5 of those passed. So we hope to see the same success, but even bigger in our 2020 initiative. So the 3 elements that we'll have are going to be a get out the vote initiative, and this is where, we will help voters understand whether they want to do mail-in ballots, or whether they're going to mail in person, or whether they what issues they care about, what time of day they're going to go. I think what we know and what research shows is that if you make a plan to vote, you will vote. So, and you got to do your homework up front, and you got to put it on your calendar. So you'll see a voting initiative, a Get Out the Vote initiative, happen in August. In September, we'll launch a voter's guide, and the voter guide will provide in-depth information on key issues, watch-worthy races, in-depth detail on state ballot initiatives, so and possible in-depth information on certain candidates, so in those watch-worthy races. So look for that voter's guide in September, and it will dig into the issues that we care about as a community, from climate to outdoor recreation, getting more people outside, investing in public lands. Those issues will all be illuminated in the 2020 Voters Guide.
Great, and we've got some fantastic questions. Keep them coming, so I'll give a couple right here. Ron asks, will Biden's VP pick have a meaningful impact on the elections, and who would help him the most? I will say that I think that VP picks are extremely important at the moment that they happen, and they tend to fade in importance right away. And when you asked who would help him the most, I think there's a challenge, which is to say, of course, there's a lot of pressure on him, rightly so, to pick an African-American candidate. With that said, he's already said that he will be that the VP candidate will be a woman. And so I think what's most important are 2 things. One is that they're perceived to have the experience to take over for him, because of course he's fully acknowledged that he's very old. Or quite old, but second, that that's I think what people are going to look for, and I think for worse, not for better or worse, but for worse, there will be a higher standard put on an African American woman than on anybody else, should they be the candidate. In terms of who would help the most, I would just say one thing in terms of what would hurt him. I'm a big opponent of putting someone on the ballot who's never been elected to office, and I say that not because there's anything wrong with not running for office, but to have somebody never having had to ask people to vote for them become the national standard bearer for a party is an incredibly tough position to be in. And you have no idea whether they have the skill set that's required to do that. So at the very least, I would hope that that he picks somebody, if you're from a Democratic perspective, who has run for office at a significant and high level. Otherwise, that, the VP picks can really hurt you, and that could be something that could be disastrous. be a disaster. Second question from Ron, then there's another one after that. How important will the debates be this year? Extremely, extremely, extremely important. I can't tell you how much coverage they will get. This will be, and normally debates, even in presidential years, are a little bit like both sides say, oh, I'm great, that one's awful, and oh my goodness, what a terrible gaffe that person made. And then the headlines say, candidate A and candidate B spar and exchange charges. That's one thing. The thing about this year's debates, which is so important, is number one, Trump draws incredible audiences, love him or hate him. It's going to be must-see TV, which will undoubtedly capture the eyes of an incredibly large segment of voters. So anything that happens will be highlighted. Second, we've seen this over and over again. The question is whether this will be repeated. The incumbent president tends to do extremely poorly in their first debate. George W. Bush did poorly in his first debate. President Obama did extremely poorly in his debate. The question is if Trump will repeat that trend, because that's something that I think is almost predictable. And so that's going to be important. Now, having said that, in all two of the examples, both examples I gave, both Bush and Obama, people said this is a disaster. They both turned it around and came back. So I think that the media scrutiny, and I think the scrutiny on the debates this year is going to be very important. Question from Kate. The last point about outdoor enthusiasts and how you expect them to vote. I didn't actually say how I expect them to vote. Generally, they are more Democratic than Republican, but not completely so. Certainly in the hunting and angling community, you tend to have a more Republican base. And I think that's not bad, which is to say, if you're a Democrat, if you care about an issue, it's generally better to have strong bipartisan support. Because as you've experienced, you have a major piece of legislation that's beneficial for you that passed. And that's not because the people that care about the outdoors are Democrats or Republicans. It's because they're both. And so from a political perspective, sure, you might like them to vote for one party or another, but for durable, long-term strength, if you could choose, you want supporters that are credible on both sides of the aisle to get the kinds of outcomes you want. I'm ready for more questions if people have them. That's great to get a few.
Well, thank you, everybody. If you do have more questions and you want to reach us, you can email events@outdoorindustry.org and we'll answer those questions. This recording.
I've got two more quick ones. Do we have a minute? Are we ending at 2:45 or do we have some?
No. Keep going. I just didn't see questions come through, so right. we can keep going. You keep talking.
I just scroll down. People, please keep them coming. Started by this is from Lee. You started the presentation by saying we may not have election results for several weeks after the election due to mail-in ballots, claims of voter fraud. What's my biggest concern? The answer is all of the above, right? Which is to say you're going to have mail-in ballots. You're going to have absentee. The results are going to be close. So you may have recounts, and then of course there'll be claims of voter fraud and litigation. And I think that'll happen irrespective of who wins if it is a close race. So, people say, it's better for it to be a romp than not a romp. I will say this for, those who are on the Democratic side who want to see this get for, to be a big romp, and certainly those on the Trump side who are hopeful, and the Republican side, hopeful it gets closer. We in America have close elections, and that is a distinct part. Our last 10 elections have been the closest 10 elections in the history of America, which is to say we've not had a landslide. And you say, oh, this candidate won by more. We have not had a presidential landslide since 1984. Every single race has been decided by 10 points or less. And things we call landslides, like Obama, won by a huge margin. He won by 7 points, right? Johnson won by 30. Okay, just to give a sense of the Nixon in 72 won, I think, by 28. So we don't do that well. And the reason I think is frankly, because of people like me, because of my profession, because of pollsters. That people don't tend to follow strategies that lead them to big deficits very long, because enough evidence comes in to show them that. I think you see Trump today, or the last couple of days, pivoting. Who knows whether that's going to last, but he's pivoting because he can't ignore the fact that he's had a durable deficit. And so certainly whichever side you hope for, you of course want to hope for a win by a lot. But, you know, as I said, when I started this, most people who come and talk to me, and, you know, my friends tend to be a little bit more democratic. They don't really want to know what the numbers are. They want to be told everything's going to be fine. And I'm telling you, this is going to be closer than it seems today. I might be wrong, but that, if I were to say one thing that I feel confident on, it's that nobody's going to win this election by 10 points. All right. Excuse me, a bunch more questions here. I'll get to a couple of folks who have not asked questions. What is the Brooklyn Sale Bag says thank you. I assume that's a product. I'll buy some. Everyone buy Brooklyn Sale Bags. Okay, one other. What is the best way for individual voters to support bills, acts, and legislation that is environmentally friendly and or friendly to the active outdoor industry? Number one, call your member of Congress. Number two, donate money to your member of Congress and use that opportunity to give them input on this issue as your most important issue. And then, of course, number three is to motivate people to vote between now and Election Day. The only thing members of Congress are thinking about are voters. So if you can get other people to tell them that they care about it and are voting, there's nothing better than that. Lots of other ways too, but frankly, call your member of Congress, get people out to vote, and whatever you have, if you give money and can make it clear as you give the money that this is your most important issue, whether it's $5, $500, or maxing out at $2,700 in the general election, they hear that. Amy says, I've been hearing that absentee ballots is being pushed this year more than ever because of COVID-19. Do you think there's realistic concern about absentee ballots being counted? I think there is. I mean, I think that, you know, this is a tough time because of the amount of information and misinformation on social media, frankly, from both sides about issues, but a little bit more from the push from the Republican side. I think there should be a realistic concern, but you know, most places, they do a pretty good job of counting these. I think the bigger concern is the timeliness of absentee ballot counting, which is going to be a big issue moving forward. David asks, how important will the political conventions really be due to the impact of pandemic on their conduct? I think they're not going to be important at all. To be honest, I think they haven't been important in years. I think like, if things are very different in the convention, like, so you have your convention, you get a little bit of a bump and then it goes away. That's, I think, been the lesson. I think a couple differences you saw was in 2004, George W. Bush had a really tremendous convention, and I think that really pushed him up, and he never gave up the lead pretty much after that in his reelection. And I think President Obama's 2008, now it's 2012, but his 2008 convention, where he, for the first time, did something in an outdoor stadium was really tremendous. But I think that they become less important, and I don't imagine they'll be extremely important this year, especially when measured against, I think the VP pick's going to get a lot of attention, but then the debates are going to be extremely important. Shout out from George Cooper, a colleague at Forbes Tate Partner, go Chevy Chase DC or Chevy Chase Maryland. There are clear expectations from Republicans. Just look at Trump's tweet yesterday that the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act will provide big boosts to Gardner and Daines. Is that a reasonable expectation? I think that it's challenging to say that, because I think that certainly it might be for Daines, which is to say he's one that is in a much more competitive race. I think that Hickenlooper's strength in Colorado, let me go in a different way, which is that if Hickenlooper loses in Colorado, it will be a signal that Democrats are not taking back the chamber. And so I don't think something as small as, I mean, small is the wrong word, but something about this level compared to what people who, and just to be specific, what people in Colorado care most about and why it's becoming bluer is not because Trump did or did not sign the Great American Outdoors Act. It's because of more fundamental issues as well. It's not to say it's not a great accomplishment and something that I think could help a lot of people in marginal areas, but I don't consider, I think that it's going to help someone like Daines more than Gardner. What do you think the impact will be if the president is of one party and the Senate is of the other party? Did not fare well in 2012. So just curious of your take on this happening again. I mean, I think look, divided government is now the norm, not something that's different. So, you know, I mean, the impact will be, and this is going to sound simple, but it's just going to be harder to pass legislation, and the amount of momentum that the president will have is going to be extremely limited given all the rancor going into this election. So, you know, even in the past, as hard as it's been in the past to pass legislation, it's going to be that much harder. Do you foresee this being an extremely divisive election for the country no matter who wins? That's from John. Yes, yeah, it already is an extremely divisive election. I think that one thing that's really important to note is that, and this gets to a point that I made earlier, is that in a lot of ways we've had a 50-50 electorate, only the things that divided that 50-50 are changing over time. So, you know, in 2000, we had a 50-50 election, slight Democratic win, and they lost in the Electoral College. In 2016, same thing happened again. However, and this is the big difference, is that the strength of those divisions, the issues that they divided on were different, and the passion of those issues were also much bigger too. So I think that it already is a divisive race. Jen, what do you think the most important thing people who live in guaranteed blue states can do to help the national results? Move would be the first answer. Go to another state. The second is there are lots of ways, and by the way, there are Republicans in this audience, so in guaranteed red states, this is true as well. There are lots of organizations that are out there for you to contact, do voter contact, do the work you can to help to motivate people, and to also travel to those states. Obviously, if you live in Los Angeles, it's a lot further to go to get out the vote than if you live in, say, my home city of Washington, D.C., and you're a Democrat and you want to do work in Pennsylvania or something like that. But there are ways that you can contribute in that way. But, you know, other than moving, it's pretty tough. From Zane, any additional commentary on the toss-up Senate races in the Mountain West, Arizona, Montana, and Colorado? I'll give a ranking just for the heck of it. All three of those are Republican seats in order of likelihood to flip: Colorado, Arizona, Montana, right? And I say that because what's more interesting to me is not like which is definitely going to go, but the order in which they go, because that has implications for the future in terms of how people address those states. But I think the interesting story of those three, the most interesting story is Arizona, where McSally has turned out to not be a very good candidate and has lost a lot of support from the Republican elites who've been unimpressed with her campaign. Montana and Colorado are both much more interesting races and much more likely to go to Democrats, whether they do or don't, based on the late entry of governors into those races. There's a question that I don't have the answer to, so maybe for you, Jen, is there something OIA is doing to inform about senators and Republicans about their issues for the outdoor industry? From Amy. You're muted.
I saw that happening. I was going to take that one, Amy. You know, that is one of the core pieces of work that OIA does. We have an office in Washington, D.C., and we have experts who are on the phone and talking with elected officials and their staffs daily, and we're bringing to them the voice of the outdoor industry on issues that are important. Like, you know, for example, Great American Outdoors Act. We have been, informing, cajoling, doing all the work of lobbying that we do. We also have tools and resources like our Action Alert Center that provides members and member consumers and member networks the opportunity to reach out to your senators. You can identify who your senators and Congress people, are. Even at the local level, you can identify your legislature to go and reach out to them and tell them what's important to you about different pieces of legislation or different issues. So we hit it from both angles, but yes, that is one of OIA's core purpose. So if there's something you want to get out there and that's something important to you, definitely let us know.
So a couple more that I will answer. One that I don't really know much about, so I'll leave it on the list. From Megan, campaign issue terrain side, environment versus jobs. For those of us in the nonprofit public lands advocacy work, what message are strongest to get people to vote? How much should we lean into economy plus outdoors messaging versus protect this place messaging? I think that is an absolutely fantastic and important question. And I think it's a question of who you're talking to, right? sorry, it was economy and outdoors versus protect this place. You know, if you have people that you are encountering in the outdoors, it's clearly a protect this place message. If you know that people care about this, you should bring them that message. I think certainly at the state level, and as I think Governor Polis, I think answered your question, which is to say that their outdoor recreation is the center of their COVID recovery and is central to them being successful moving forward, that without COVID, without the outdoors, Colorado doesn't exist as it is. It doesn't have the same level of strength that it has right now. So I got to say that it's not one silver bullet message. And I think more importantly, I think we're also largely beyond that old, it's economy or jobs. I think people know that both can, the environment versus jobs, they know that they can work together. From Jen, theoretically, how would a national vote by mail program affect this election, as well as voting on environmental issues? I don't really know, you know, because I think that there's two schools of thought on this. One is that, you know, you look at a state like Oregon, which is all by mail and has been for a while, and a couple other states that have moved to all vote by mail. They have tended to be more blue states and in some ways have moved bluer. Some people say it's because it is national, it was done by mail, and others say it's just because those are states that did vote by mail, because it tends to, for not very good reasons, I don't think, be something Democratic states favor over Republican states. There's a bit of a perception that if you do vote by mail, you're going to get more people to vote. And there's, I think, a misperception that more people vote necessarily helps Democrats. I think if there were a national vote by mail program and both sides were invested in it to make sure that it happens, I don't think that it would affect election results much at all. I think that they would be, you know, pretty similar to how they were before. And there's some argument to be said that if you got rid of voting in person, there's a lot of people that believe that voting in person is actually what excites people about voting. I mean, not me, but, you know, there's folks who believe that going there and getting their sticker really makes a difference to them. So, you know, there may be people who would be surprised that either would ignore it or wouldn't really pay attention, would forget to vote by mail, that would vote regularly. I think overall, you know, if I were to have to make a guess, that it would help the Democratic side by a point or two. But, you know, I don't know that it would definitely have the expected effect. And most reforms like that tend to have more unexpected consequences than were imagined at the beginning. Oh, one more. What was the poll slide? In the last slide that said only 78% said they were vote. It was a national survey of 1,000. So typical 1,000 sample. Who knows? Maybe outdoor industry enthusiasts are more honest, right? Everyone likes to say they're going to vote, and obviously not everybody does, and maybe they're being more honest about it. But, you know, that the number's the number. It could be wrong, it could be right, but I think that the fact that you see a difference is something that's notable.
Just to give credit where credit is due, the conservation, those last two slides that Doug presented were, it was a study done by the Conservation Alliance. And if you wanted to get deeper into that, because it definitely talks about issues and really highlights the outdoor voter, you could watch a repeat video session of yesterday's breakfast from Outdoor Retailer Online. They went in depth into the study. I think that is all the time we have for questions. Doug, thank you so much. Like I said, you know, you did a fabulous job making some complex information easy to understand and consume. There definitely are questions that were not answered, and we will take all those questions and answer them and forward out some content and answers to the attendees. These recordings are available on Outdoor Retailer's website and will also be available on OIA's website under the events and education section. If you have any questions, please email events@outdoorindustry.org. I just want to thank everyone for being here, and I want you to look out for OIA's Vote the Outdoors 2020 campaign, because, you know, it's critical that we get our outdoor voter, you know, our outdoor community here today, and those who work in the outdoor industry, but also those who love and want to protect and vote for the outdoors. Let's get the messages out there. Thank you so much for being here today, and vote in the election. Thank you.